So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon and taking time. And thank you to our discussant, Nava Derakhshani, who comes to us from New York today, but I suspect you have many homes in the world, Nava. And we hope to hear a little bit about them. Nava is an artist and a writer who's currently based in New York. She did her Mphil at Stellenbosch University in sustainable development and spent time in Ethiopia for 8 months in Tigray, carrying out her master's research in 2014. And today she's going to be sharing a personal perspective on the current conflict in Ethiopia. It's a site of human rights atrocities and war crimes, but beyond the headlines, Nava will share with us what she's learned and share with us her sentiments and her stories of the land and people and how the conflict is unfolding right now. She will also discuss the history that has brought us to this point of war in the area, and will raise questions about the environmental and cultural consequences of the conflict and what resilience could mean in this context. Nava, we are very happy to have you, and we are especially intrigued by the title of this webinar. Slowly, slowly the egg begins to walk. I trust you're going to walk us through that understanding. Yes, but you are very welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. Thank you for the introduction. Like I said, or like you pointed out, my main agenda is to show the human face and my experience and learning behind what's going on in Ethiopia right now, and my very initial efforts in understanding the conflict that's taking place right now. So how I'm going to present is I'm going to first talk a little bit, read a little bit from my own experience, and then share some photographs. So fortune or fate had taken me to Ethiopia to carry out my master's research 6 years ago, between 2013 and 2014. Like you said, Nina, I lived in Tigray, between the capital Mekelle and the village of Abrahawe Atzbaha. The year I arrived, the political party leader Meles Zenawi had just passed. So the city felt like it had a bit of mourning going on. I remember one night I was sitting at like the one barbecue pub where fresh meat burgers were served with French fries, and I said something casually to someone at the table of what happened to be international expats in Mekelle. This person pulled me in and she said, you know, be careful about what you say out loud. You can't say anything to criticize the government. I was a bit confused and I said, but you know, I wasn't on the phone. And she said, you know, there's spies everywhere. It's not a big deal, but you should be careful about what you say. So that was one of my many first introductions to censorship in Ethiopia at the time. I came to learn that journalists were imprisoned and emails were routinely checked for sensitive keywords. And I apologize for the background noise. When I moved to Abrahawe Atzbaha village to carry out my research, I had this at the back of my mind. I was worried that people are going to be afraid to talk to me and to hold back on things they wanted to say, because I was relying on oral history interviews to understand the spiritual or, you know, holistic ties to sustainability and conservation. I was about to learn that there are many sides to a story and the importance of geopolitical history when it comes to sustainability. So preparing to give this talk today was very difficult. There's so much to manage and talk about. The reason I approached the university was because the new wave of conflict in Ethiopia was just emerging, but only on the fringes of the news, and I felt like no one was really talking about it. Like I said, I lived in Tigray, which is the region in the middle of the conflict today. I made friends there. I lived in a household that became my own, and I really have no way of knowing if they're okay. Mm-hmm. So where do I start?
Nava?
Yes?
I just wondered at this point, perhaps, if it's a good place to involve our audience and to get a sense of what they know about Tigray and the conflict there. So would you mind if I started the poll?
Yeah, please go for it. Thank you, Nina.
Okay. So to our guests, there is a poll that asks, how much do you know about the current conflict in Ethiopia? And it will just really give us a good sense of where you're at with this story as we enter Nava's narrative and hear her understanding. Okay, I think everyone has voted so far, and the choices were nothing at all, just the headlines. I'm up to date on developments. So I'm going to end the poll right now and share results for everybody. And it seems that most of us gathered just understand the headlines. Some of us don't know anything at all, but very encouraging that at least 7 participants in this webinar are deeply immersed and are up to date and understand a comprehensive picture that I think Nava would enrich so much with her sharing. So thank you all for participating. It's just a really good benchmark for us to know who and where we are as we gathered to share with you, Nava. Thank you.
Thanks, thank you, everyone. It's very good to know that. So like I said, where do I begin? And I will start with Abahawi. Abahawi was a renowned leader in the village that I lived in. He had, I'm sorry, is the noise, can you hear the noise, Nina?
Not so much, Nava,
okay.
No.
Okay. So Abahawi was a renowned leader, and he had this wild ambition to transform his village from a dry and rain-depleted valley into a thriving Amazon-like rainforest. He was an innovator and was winning awards and recognition through the University of Mphil. They were regenerating water tables for irrigation to supplement dwindling rainfall and mobilizing soil retention and reforestation efforts. Indeed, it was becoming a green valley. I know I'm going to share some photos later. It looks a bit red, but I promise you it's green for the region. But this was not just about Abahawi and his village accomplishments. The national government under the TPLF, which is the Tigrinian People's Liberation Front, had a strong developmental agenda. They intended to undo years of harm on the land because of conflict and mismanagement, to make their people strong and move beyond subsistence farming. They had fought hard to overcome the tyrannous military Derg oppressors before them. They endured decades of war using their guerrilla warfare tactics and collaborated with allies across the country. The Derg was ruthless in its hold for power, and this is important to note. They oppressed opposition and killed thinkers, philosophers, even university students. They employed what was known as the scorched earth policy during the war, where they burned fields of farmland, imposing hunger and starvation as a warfare tactic. But still, eventually, the TPLF and their allies won and took office in 1991. The years of conflict showed up in international news as one of the world's worst famines. I'm sure people in the audience will remember the images of starving children from the 1980s. So the new government wanted to build a new trajectory of hope and growth for the people and the country, which, to be honest, they did do. Ethiopia is one of the fastest growing economies in Africa and seats the African Union. I remember one of the elderly farmers who I interviewed remarked to me one day that their leader, Meles Zenawi, was even greater than our Nelson Mandela, because they were taking care of the poor farmers, whereas in South Africa, as we know, our poor people are still predominantly poor. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I heard a different side of the story. They are no different from the Derg, one man said to me. The only difference is the Derg was killing people in public and on rooftops, whereas now they're doing it behind closed doors. I'll be honest, of course, my research couldn't look at the whole country. I was based in Tigray, but there were reports of displaced people in order to lease off large tracts of land, of fertile lands, to Chinese farmers. And on the rare occasion when I passed through Addis, there were a few, you could sometimes feel tension on the streets. Abahawi's wife was the one who rented me a room in their compound. She had 10 children, and her eyes were often watery from the harsh sun, but her sense of humor was always ready to be tickled. We communicated through gestures and my very fledgling Tigrinya, which I later learned was, of course, a sense of comedy for her. Their household was financially driven. They had fruit and coffee trees, and their garden they had fruit and coffee trees in their garden, and children of relatives were always staying with them. They had a television that was used exclusively for the news, and some nights we played music and danced in circles in the open darkness of the village. Haile Mariam was one of the young people in their household. On his days off, we would go for walks, and he would show me the village and the surroundings. High school educated, we could talk in English. He was tall and teased for his dark skin. He was unhappy without family to return to and felt stuck in the village. So he dreamed of becoming a bus driver as a ticket out. And the last I heard of him before the conflict erupted was that he had earned his driver's license and was now driving a bus driver in the nearby town. In the village, he showed me riverways, previously dry and progressively becoming seasonal. I learned, though, that because of climate change, an important annual rainfall season known as Asmara was completely lost to the region. So many farmers told me that God had locked the sky and they had lost an annual crop because of it. So this is why water retention and the water table and irrigation are so important to move away from a reliance on the rain. The TPLF ruled for 30 years, but intensifying protests led to a change in leadership in 2018. And after that, and after I had left, Abiy Ahmed of the Oromo region was elected into governance. So this is where I kind of need to back up a little bit and talk more broadly about Ethiopia. Ethiopia, like many countries in the world, but especially Ethiopia, has over 80 ethnic groups and distinct languages. Tigray only makes up 6% of the total population. The Oromo and Amhara regions make up 35 and 30% respectively. Are you following? I don't know if I'm going too much into statistics.
That's good.
Okay. So the TPLF formed a controversial system of decentralized power where any region could secede if they chose to. But now they are criticized for using the system to loot Ethiopia's wealth for their own benefit. And this takes me back to another old man from Abrahawa Atzbaha village. He said to me, you know, the Italians tried to conquer Ethiopia. Ethiopia has a reputation for never being colonized. So he said the Italians tried to conquer Ethiopia, but their problem was that they came through Tigray. We are fierce warriors and they could not win against us. Some narratives, though, on the other hand, say that the Italians did make it, but they made it to Eritrea, causing Eritrea to develop different from the rest of the country with Italian city planning and buildings. So since then, relationships between Eritrea and Tigray have been tense. When the TPLF, among other parties, joined forces to overcome the bloody and oppressive, emphasis, military Derg regime, their sister nation, Eritrea, decided to secede and break away from Ethiopia. So after 30 years of war to regain freedom, Ethiopia under the TPLF entered into war with Eritrea for another 2-year battle, where borderlines became increasingly contentious, and one pastoral land by the name of Badame was especially important, and they fought over it. I listened to a podcast recently which was released in 2018 when Prime Minister Abiy had just brokered a peace deal with Eritrea, and they had journalists from both Eritrea and Tigray, and both of the journalists were really happy about this peace deal. And that's when I realized that Abe, Prime Minister Abe, also fought in that war for Badme. So it's interesting to note that these neighbors are very close, are very related. They even speak the same language, but there's incredible tensions between them. So speaking of neighbors, John was my closest friend in the village. He was a nurse, educated in Mphil, who loved his work. He was the most joyful person I have ever met. He was excited to see any friend who came to visit him. He always had stories and jokes and made everyone laugh. And he was always flirting with someone new. So one day, when I came to his room next door to mine, it was almost empty of all his furniture and ornaments. What happened? I asked him. And some of the others were sitting with him, trying to console him. My wife, he said, she came and took everything. It turned out that spirituality did make a difference to conservation, in especially Abrahawa Atzbaha. I was attracted to these incredible large sycamore fig trees that were scattered throughout the village. Slowly, eventually, I think as I was gaining trust in the village, the elders started telling me that angels lived on the large branches of these trees, as well as the churches in the compounds. So you could not, therefore, disturb them by cutting them down. This was one of the reasons why the region retained some of its greenery and biodiversity. Seeds were saved on the church compounds. Otherwise, the region is 80% deforested and the land is severely eroded. So it's a huge effort to replenish those farmlands, which the entire village was laboring. I can't emphasize how hard they were laboring on this. They manually were building rock terraces, taller than myself, and trenches around the village. They hand dug wells for irrigation and were trying hard to manage their animals grazing. Tadesse was an agricultural officer who worked for the government. He came out to the village every day to meet farmers and advise them. Some days I would tag along with him and he would explain his job to me. He was very smart and passionate about helping the community, with dreams of engineering technology to make farming easier for their people. Sheshai was another young person in the village. She was constantly busy with her child and household chores, but I'd often hear her singing, and whenever she could, she'd also be dancing to the whatever Ethiopian jazz was playing in the household. So today, reports are saying that Eritrean forces are raiding Tigray as foot soldiers for the new government. This is Abiy Ahmed's Nobel Peace Prize winning government. It's the government which brokered a peace deal with Eritrea as soon as it took office. It's also the government which charged over 70 TPLF officers for corruption. They proposed a unified and centralized state system to take over the predecessors of the decentralized system. But they systematically excluded Tigray from their negotiations and later launched a military attack not only on the TPLF politicians, but now it's evident that it's on the people of Tigray as well. So as far as we can tell, today, Eritrea is raiding Tigray from the north, Amhara is raiding Tigray from the south, and Tigray is drawing on, they have a reputation of having 250,000 armed forces to defend themselves. I'm worried about how strategic, in hindsight, this war is appearing to be, especially compared with past wars. I have a friend from Mekele who happened to be in Addis when the conflict began. He messaged me about a month ago saying, you know, now it's okay, day by day. I think he was trying to reassure me, and he reminded me of the Ethiopian proverb, slowly, slowly, the egg begins to walk. Day by day, he said, kes be kes, slowly, slowly. And with him, I'm especially amazed at how he's able to be so patient with war, and it's the second occurrence in his lifetime, and to so many of his generation. The strategic part that worries me, I'm sorry about that noise. The strategic part that worries me about the conflict today is that they attacked Mekele in November last year, and that's just before the farmers would have taken their harvests. So that means farmers have lost their food and harvest, and I also don't know what happened to their seed for a new season. So in addition to the internet being shut down, airports being closed off, resources such as water and electricity being shut down, roads are also now being blocked, and aid is not being delivered to those who need it. It's a recurred strategy of war and where hunger is imposed, as was what happened with the Derg before. So, you know, this is not my main area of expertise or research. I have just been following and try to understand what's happening as much as my heart can endure. I am worried that genocide by hunger, looting, and massacre is taking place in the region, and the international response is too slow to stop it. When I was going over this talk with my mother yesterday, she asked me, what do I want to accomplish? I'm one of the few expats who lived in Tigray and who has ties to this place from the outside. So I think it's important. I have a sense of responsibility to share my learning in the country and mobilize conversation about the horror that's taking place there. So this is the village of Abraha Atzbaha. Community members have gathered here for a funeral. And I'm just going to, I need to acknowledge the university staff who were very supportive to me during my time there and my research, as well as the Baha'i community who were my own community and also very supportive. My experience wouldn't have been as positive as it was were it not for this strong community of academics and the Baha'is who I entered into the. So the village houses one of the most ancient rock churches. It's carved out from the rock. Like I said, I lived with community. This is an overview of Ethiopia. The regions are showed roughly according to ethnicity. So I just wanted to show that it's a place rich in cultures, heritage, storytelling, and has a long history of farming and agriculture. This is an example of the terraces that they built, but honestly, they would go up to his height and higher sometimes. This is Abahawi, the village leader, and he's sitting amongst the many prizes that he's won and the village has won, both from the United Nations and locally. So we'll end with this image of the border, and which at that time was also very severely guarded. I can't imagine what's happening right now.
Thank you, Nava. Thank you so much. Phew, that's a very comprehensive history, and also I had images before you showed the photographs through your writing and your reflection of the people and friends you had made, and what land and sustenance means in the ways that they are practiced in Tigray. I would really at this point like to open the floor to anyone who has a question. Thank you also to Fitwi Males Hagos. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. For all of the links that you have posted in the chat. I think you've just sent it to panelists though, so we'll find a way to share it with all attendees. But thank you for that. I think Fitwi has a real desire that we know exactly what's going on, and especially the most latest developments inside Tigray. There is a question, Nava, from Margaret Hirsch, and she asks, were you not afraid being there by yourself?
I mean, no. Not at all. I felt very at home in Ethiopia, and I felt very welcomed. And my parents are from Iran, so I have that culture as my background. And I found the Ethiopian culture to be very similar to Persian culture in terms of hospitality. They're incredibly hospitable people.
Thank you. There's a question from Samuel, and Samuel's asking, what has made the conflict escalate now? Why now?
I'll be honest, it's something I'm trying to understand myself. I was there in 2013, 2014. And my intention here was really to share both my research, but the human people that I'm very worried about there right now. But from my limited research, it seems like there's narratives both from the Western media as well as from what I'm hearing from podcasts or whatever I can inside of Ethiopia. So Western media portrays it as a change in the guard. So the TPLF lost power, and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is in now. And there's like this tension of like transition of power and a reluctance on the side of the TPLF. Note that over 70 people in the TPLF were charged with criminal offenses. But it seems like it's deeper than that. And from what I'm hearing from podcasts or whatever I can access, is that it's not only the people of Tigray who are like warning. It's very like difficult to hear about what's being done to them. Sorry, I'm distracted by the chat. So it's very difficult to hear what's being done to them, but it sounds like people of Tigrinian ethnicity are being attacked around the country. So I'm trying to understand that myself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks, Nava. Nava, we have a colleague, a CST colleague, Desda Mabratu. And Desda is an expert in the region, and I know that he would like to add his voice. And so, Desda, you are very welcome. If you'd like to put your video on, and I've enabled you to share your voice, so please do.
Thank you very much, Nina. I don't see the video option, but I can go ahead with my voice. Greetings to all, and I would like to appreciate the presentation made by Neva. I think you have from what you have told us, you have a very good potential to be a good environmental anthropologist. So if you are planning to continue with your study, I think environmental anthropology could be a good area, because you have that sense of capturing what is behind whatever people are telling you. To come back to some of the key points you highlighted, even if I'm not from Tigray region, I know Tigray very well, and I know the people. I mean, they're one of the best people we have in this country. And what has been happening over the last couple of months is very sad and unfortunate. when it comes to TPLF, I also recognize the sacrifice they made to get rid of the dictatorial military regime. And I also recognize their appreciation about environmental sustainability. I think that is related to the 17 years they have spent closer to the community and the surrounding. But when it comes to their performance after taking power, I think they have made a number of blunders, particularly when it comes to the human rights side and even on the economic side. But when it comes to the situation we have today, I think that the whole situation is very complex. So as a person who is associated with complexity, sustainability, it is very important to be careful not to be trapped into this linear reductionist thinking, which is influencing everything we see on the virtual media, social media, and so on. So as a researcher, it is important to understand the complexity as a complex system. And it's only then that we can come up with possible solutions. And I hope, in my opinion, I think everybody has a part for the crisis we have today. I don't think anyone could be free from that. Of course, one party may have more responsibility than other, but the people of Tigray needs to have some break from the current situation, and I hope sanity will prevail. And if there is anyone who will be working on this, the point which I would like to emphasize is focus on understanding the complexity from systems perspective. Don't get carried away by what you hear from the media, social media, and so on, because the situation is quite complex. And unless we understand that complexity, we may contribute to the problem rather than providing a solution. So if you are thinking of continuing your study, complexity systems thinking, moving away from reductionist thinking will be the way to go. I just want to share that point with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Desta. Nava, do you have an experience perhaps of, as a reflection on what Desta has just shared, this experience of complexity perhaps during the time when you were there in Tigray, and how you were trying to understand. Nava, yeah, I was asking perhaps if you could reflect on what Desta has invited us all to do, to really grapple with this, with a complexity lens. And I wondered if there was a moment, perhaps in your stay in Tigray or through your academic inquiry into sustainability, how complexity came home for you and still comes home for you as you try and understand and really feel connected to this place and this people.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's a very complex history of the place, and there's many factors to consider. Like Desta spoke to, I tried to take a long historical perspective on what led to the moment that I was in Tigray. And part of that was the feudal system, where before the Derg, it was run by kings and queens who would take excess harvest for themselves, which meant that people had no incentive to produce excess food and encouraged a system of subsistence farming instead of excess for what would now be used as capital. And then there was the Derg regime, who were communist, and they had like different committees, and they had an agenda to work together to make agriculture for the people. But because they were so violent and aggressive on holding their power, it was more harmful than helpful. Similarly, the TPLF, I think it's important to note that I was in Tigray, and Tigray was favored by the TPLF being their own part of the country, their own people. And I think that's what I was trying to point out to in my talk about there was land grabbing taking place in other parts of the country, and there were mass protests. There was a lot of unhappiness and oppression during the time of the TPLF as well. So it's a double-edged coin. They did produce a developmental state. They did create progress, but they also did a lot of oppression, and their tactics were sometimes similar to those of the Derg in terms of oppressing competition. Sorry, I lost my words. So you can never look at something simply. My concern now, though, is yes, it's important that the corrupt officials are paid justice for what they've done. I don't think the whole ethnic group needs to be punished for what their government officials have done. That's my concern right now. I don't know if I'm.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks,
Yeah.
Nava. And I think a lot you had mentioned in your main presentation. There is a question from Gidai Melez, and he's asking, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, Nava. Taking into account the works done to bring back the fertility of the Tigray environment, including the village of Abrahawe Atsbeha in the last 30 years, what is your reflection on the level of destruction to the environment by the invading forces?
I mean, like I said, the communication to Tigray has been cut off, and I was very interested that someone in the audience is logging in from Tigray. So I really don't know what's happening there. And I was, in preparation for the talk, I was Google imaging, like Google Map, looking at Abrahawe Atsbaha, and it seemed a lot more green and fertile than the last time I saw it, which was very hopeful. So also very heartbreaking because I don't know what's going on. There's been talks of airstrikes, and it's not like a European country where like there's, I don't know, any country that where your infrastructure is broken. The infrastructure in the village are these incredible works that people did by hand, difficult hand labor. But that does speak to sustainability. I think the region has been struggling to be sustainable because of the social side of it, the social political side of it. You can't have sustainability without considering social systems or political systems, which now again are compromising. Like during war, you just think about survival. You don't think about the future.
Thank you. Nava, there's also a reflection and perhaps a call to action here in the question and answer box by Horst Kleinschmidt. And Horst is saying, can we as South African civil society collectively request our government to acknowledge that this is a war based on ethnicity and that it is an international conflict, not an internal or domestic matter? Given our own past and history of race discrimination, the South African voice should be loud and clear and demand cessation of hostilities, contribute, even host peace talks, and ask international instances to investigate all human rights violations that leads to war crimes charges and trials. I suspect I read the news quite often and try to stay updated on state pronouncements or so, but I haven't heard anything from South African government or what do you think should be done on a national level? You know, you have committed as an individual to start telling the story and to sharing it with broader audiences. As a country, as South Africa, and being part of the African Union, what do you think we should be doing?
I really feel like a nobody, but from what I've heard is the African Union has had quite a disappointing response to the conflicts. The USA has a distinct presence in Ethiopia and sees it as a strategic entryway into the Horn of Africa, which of course we have a lot of questions around that. As far as I know, President Joe Biden has called for the Eritrean forces to leave. You know, from my very new I don't take myself as an expert at all on this, but the very basis of this needs to be a ceasefire, like stop the war. And I feel like it's very naive for me to say that, but like that needs to happen. People need to be protected. And then intense negotiations need to take place between the political parties and the ethnic groups. But I think that's a lot simpler said than done. I think mediation would be helpful, but there's always the question of what are the intentions of the mediators when they come in. So I guess I'm just asking more questions, but I think there are important questions to ask in terms of how to intervene, because often when an outside force intervenes, they always have their personal agendas and not necessarily taking the interests of people at heart or nations at heart. Yeah.
I realize that there may be quite a few participants here from Ethiopia. And I think it would be really lovely to hear their voice. So Kidane, I think it is, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and to share what you would like to say.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to appreciate and thank Nava for the initiative and for creating this platform and also sharing her experience about the community in Tigray. Now, I think you have a very good story of the community pre the conflict, including the history and the people who have been doing everything they can, you know, to change their livelihood. Now with the conflict, despite the politics of TPLF versus the central government, I think what is important to focus on is the impact of the conflict on people. I think you rightly say that there is a political difference and power conflict, but I think what is unique about Tigray is the way government behaves and uses its power to massacre and loot and destroy a community that was more vibrant, a community who has been able to make a difference and change their environment and their livelihoods and been recognized internationally and nationally for the excellent work that they have been doing on the environment, on the climate, you know, the issue of climate change and livelihood. So I would strongly encourage you. It's very painful. You're going to hear bad story about the people, the women and the young people that you've made, but you know, remain strong and continue to do the research and focus on what was happening in Tigray during the Derg regime and what were the people of Tigray doing, or the community in Arba Hatzbaha were doing during those 30 years of peace? And then what is the impact of the conflict on the people since Abiy came to power? So I think the story for me is about conflict, peace, and development. And I think you've got a good experience, a good research product there, but continue to do it so that you have a very complete picture of what conflict, peace, and development mean for people of Africa, and specifically the case of Tigray. I happen to be from Wukro, which is about 10 kilometers from the village that you've been. I was born there, although I was grown up in Mekele, and I can feel your experience very well. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and for the sympathy. For the sympathy for the community in Tigray. So yeah, it's a very complex system, but I think focusing on a community, on a village, Arbahaspaha, or the community that you've experienced, I think tells a huge story, and you'll be able to unpack that complex nature in Ethiopia by just focusing on that village, because the research on that village could tell a lot about and unpack the complexity that we have experienced in Ethiopia. Thank you so much, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Kidane. It's lovely to have you here.
Wow. Thank you so much, Kidane. It's really wonderful to see and notice so many people from Ethiopia who are here, who are sharing their voice. Nava, I think you've attracted a really incredible audience to this webinar. And praise and encouragement to you for your efforts as well. How do we reconcile this last point of Kidane about conflict and development and sustainability on the continent? Ethiopia is not the only country, and I'm not asking you to answer that question, but maybe how do we approach the question as scholars of sustainability, understanding complexity and knowing that in that we're never quite solving just for one thing. That we're looking at a much broader landscape. How do you approach such questions, Nava?
I mean, honestly, it's really hard, of course. But I think for me, history is always really important to understand where we come from and what led to where we are now. I am an amateur now on the issue of Eritrea, but it seems to me that deep-rooted conflicts comes from the influence of colonialism. So unfortunately, our continent is not free from a very oppressive history in relation to the Europeans, to be honest. So I think that's something to consider, and I'm kind of being defensive for our continent, because when I hear external voices about Africa, there's a lot of emphasis on corruption and, corruption. And for me, there's always two sides to corruption, and who is the people who are participating in corruption are outside forces again. And it's a form of neo-colonialism or neo-influence on the continent. So I think for me, that's our ambition of the African Union, is to really see each other as one society. That's really my hope. Our diversity makes us rich and beautiful, and it's something to celebrate. It's not something to fight over or put each other down for. So I think we really need to consider the diversity, just as we appreciate biodiversity. we need to appreciate, and the importance of biodiversity for an ecological system to thrive. We need human diversity as well, and we all have something to offer to making the world and our place is a better system. But yeah, we have a history of conflicts in this continent, and it comes in the way of development. I don't know how to. We need to resolve our conflicts hand in hand with trying to move forward in terms of development. Yeah, sorry, it's very off the top of my head, but like often environmental movements are criticized for being very white and like a white thing, like an elite thing. But the reality is that for me, especially from this research that having spent time in Ethiopia, is it's very much about development. It's very much about the people in the most vulnerable places. We know this as academics, we know this, but I think it's about understanding that in sustainable development, environmental development goes hand in hand with social needs and economic development. Again, I don't know if I answered your question, but
you did. Thank you. I think Desda also has a very helpful reflection that he's posted in the chat, and Desda says, looking at the incredible wealth of knowledge that exists in indigenous knowledge systems in terms of conflict resolution, environmental coping mechanisms, and local governance could be a useful entry point for promoting sustainability in Africa. Thank you, Desda. Rika has also posted a critical argument about how to understand peace building as a complex process. Thank you, Rika. There's a question to Nava. How did your artistic tools help you to engage with your research?
I don't know. Well, I think, honestly, I've always been interested in, I'm a creative person. I've always been interested in using art in my practice. But I think often if you come from something intellectually, it helps to approach it from a different mode of thinking, both in terms of research as well as in terms of presentation. So I found that storytelling is often more powerful than statistics. Like, I introduce you to a person and their story and their history and their struggles or the hopes and ambitions. That's more powerful than telling you that 10 people are farmers in blah. There's a lot of value in using a creative approach, an alternative approach to the same subject matter.
Nava, if I may ask, and we have just about 2 minutes left in ending off, if you were to choose one of the many gifts that your time in Tigray gave you, what would you choose to share with us, to say this is the thing that I carry with me or closely in my life from that time and from that experience and learning?
I mean, my time in Ethiopia has been the most impactful experience of my life. It made me aware, very much like we spoke of, the broader complex systems that impact and influence a place. You can't just look at something only for environmental reasons. There's like broader systems. But I guess what stays with me are my friends, the people that I met there, and our experiences together. Like, I still think of the comedy we had together, the jokes we had together. It was a very profound experience, and I guess the hospitality and warmth and kindness of my friends, both in Tigray and Mekelle, that's what stays with me. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I'll put my email address in the chat. I'd love to stay in touch with people, especially Habesha.
Good. Thanks, Nava. So we have we have come to the end of our time, and there is a lot of people who are appreciative, Nava, of your effort and your mission, I think, that you've set yourself. A lot of supporters here and a lot of people from Ethiopia who feel very deeply about this issue and many issues like this on our continent. So I'd like to really thank a very wonderful and engaged audience, and a caring audience and a passionate audience for being with us for this hour and for engaging with Nava and all of her stories and insights that she shared with us. Nava, for somebody who, you know, just knew a little bit beyond the headlines, I'm certainly more provoked to find out more and to talk about it some more. So thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you everyone for your time. Please take note of Nava Derakhshani at gmail.com. Nava's just posted her email address in the chat, so please be sure to grab it before the webinar closes.
Thank you so much, Nina. Thank you. Yeah, you've been an incredible host. Yeah.
Good. My pleasure.
I really hope the conversations continue around Ethiopia and the atrocities around the world, especially Africa. I'm very homesick. Hopefully I can return to Ethiopia and definitely South Africa. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here.